وتم التسليم على سيدنا وحبيبنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وعملا وفقها في الدين يا رب العالمين، وألحقنا بعبادك الصالحين. اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا ورزقا طيبا وعملا متقبلا. يقول الله عز وجل: وأطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول واحذروه. Last week we were doing the chapter on Kitab Sunnah regarding what are considered as proofs from the Sunnah. How do we understand what we take as proof from Hadith and what we don't take as proof? So we went through some of the categories regarding the Sunnah. These categories were Mutawatir, Mashoor, and Khabar Ahad. We slightly covered Mutawatir. We said Mutawatir is basically that hadith which was transmitted by so many people from the companions of the Prophet, to the Tabi'een, and then the Tabi'een, there were so many Tabi'een that transmitted to their students, which was the Atba'u Tabi'een. And then later on the scholars, those who compiled the books of hadith. Okay, this is called Mutawatir. So there's two types of Mutawatir. One is Mutawatir that is lafzi, meaning that hadith which was narrated by Rasulullah exactly with the same exact wording, not just the meaning. The wording itself is from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. An example that we gave was Man kadhaba alayya muta'ammidan falyatabawwa maq'adahu minan nar. This is an example of a hadith that is mass transmitted from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with its exact wording from his students, which are the Sahaba, their students, which are the Tabi'een, and their students thereafter until it got compiled, okay, inside the books. But even from the time of the Sahaba, we have many ahadith that are compiled also, okay? So no one can poke fingers into our religion at all in any way or form. Anyway, here the hadith, Man kadhaba alayya muta'ammidan, whoever lies upon me intentionally must reserve his seat in hellfire. This hadith is mutawatir. This is the highest level of any hadith that can be. Why? Because the danger of lying upon the Prophet and then it being transmitted is much more dangerous than your saying or my saying or Yasir Qadi's saying being transmitted to mass millions. Okay? Whatever Yasir Qadi says, that's his own opinion. Whatever I say, that's my own opinion. Okay? But what Rasulullah says becomes Sharia. This is the deen of Allah, because why we went through the verses? How the verses? To prove Sunnah. In huwa illa wahyun yuha wa ma yantiqu anil hawa. He doesn't speak out of his own will. He cannot speak out of his own will. Everything that he says is revelation. Wahi. This is the clear distinction between Rasulullah and us. We don't have wahi, we haven't seen the unseen. He's seen much of the unseen. Okay? So this hadith was narrated by 98 Sahabas. 98 Sahabas verbatim. The exact statement, the exact wording of this hadith. Man kadhaba, whoever lies upon me intentionally must reserve his place in hellfire. This hadith was narrated by 98 Sahaba. It's one of the most popular hadiths amongst the Sahaba. That's why many of the Sahaba, they refrained from narrating too much. In fact, Abu Hurairah, because he was narrating too much in the reign of Umar, when Umar radiallahu anhu was the Khalifatul Muslimin, Amirul Mu'mineen, at that time, Abu Hurairah was there next to the minbar because he was from the Muhaddithin. He was from the Sahabas who had special blessings from Rasulullah, and he was able to memorize much more than anyone else. Although he only stayed with Rasulullah for 3.5 years. But in that 3.5 years, what he could gain was unlike that of any other Sahaba. He gained much more in hadith. The statements of the Rasulullah, the characteristics of Rasulullah, he would take particular attention. Why he was saying, we used to stay hungry from Ahlul Sufa next to the masjid, on the courtyard of the masjid. We used to live next to the courtyard of the masjid, listening and paying attention to every single word that came out of the Rasulullah. Listening and paying attention to how Rasulullah walked, how Rasulullah ate, how Rasulullah spoke to others, how he dealt with Bedouins, for example, when they came in harshly from the deserts. How uncivilized, how you deal with uncivilized people, how you deal with prisoners of war. He saw all of this with his own eyes because he used to live more or less inside the masjid, next to the masjid. He was joined to the masjid, the courtyard of the masjid. They were Ahlul Sufa. So he was like, I stayed with Rasulullah in hunger next to the masjid when you were all busy in businesses, making money out there. So that's why I learned of the prophethood, of revelation from Rasulullah, Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, much more than any companion knows. Okay, this is not to say that he is more knowledgeable than Abu Bakr. This is not to say he's more knowledgeable than Umar radiallahu anhu. No. Umar radiallahu anhu, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, Uthman radiallahu anhu, Ali radiallahu anhu, they accompanied him from the beginning of Wahy until the end of Wahy. You understand? They accompanied him from since 40-year-old until 63 years old. Whole 23 years they were with him. That's why they knew Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, Umar radiallahu anhu, Uthman radiallahu anhu, Ali radiallahu anhu, they knew the most in regards to Rasulullah. There's no one in the whole of Sahaba, the galaxy of all the Sahaba, there's no one that knows more than Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, in that order as well. Okay? So this hadith is mass transmitted from every single generation, from Rasulullah with the exact wording. This is one of the hadiths. Another hadith would be regarding, for example, Masah al khuffayn, to wipe on top of the leather socks. Leather socks. The socks that you find in the Islamic shops, they sell those ones. Okay. The rule in regards to that, we're not going to go into now because it's not a fiqh lesson. It's just an Usoolul fiqh lesson, just to give you an example of a mass transmitted hadith according to the wording itself. Okay. So this hadith, according to the same wording of Rasulullah, exact wording of Rasulullah from the Sahabas, from the Tabi'in, from the Atba' al-Tabi'in, was narrated by more than 40 Sahabas. To the extent that Masah al khuffayn, to wipe upon the leather socks, is even narrated in some Aqidah books. Not just Imam al-Tahawi, other books as well I've seen. Okay? So Imam al-Tahawi's book, he includes that as part of Aqidah. Why? Because it's from those ahadiths that are mutawatir to the highest degree, mass transmitted to the highest degree. Every single person in every single generation more or less knew these hadiths. Okay? This was mass media. If you want to understand it, then it was mass media at that time. Okay, these hadiths. So, Masah al khuffayn, according to all the four madhabs, it's absolutely valid. Okay, for a resident, there might be some different rulings in the different madhabs. So, I'm not going to go into that, inshallah. Tawatur ma'nawi. Then we went on to that hadith which, according to the meaning, was mass transmitted. So, according to the meaning, it was narrated. So, it wasn't narrated according to the exact wording of Rasulullah. Okay? Exact wording of Rasulullah was not preserved, but the meaning was preserved. For example, the hadith al-Dajjal. Hadith al-Dajjal. There's so many Sahabas narrating the hadith of Dajjal from so many places, from so many different types of Sahabas. If a person denies it, he's going to go on the borderline of kufr. You understand? He's going to go on the borderline of kufr, because this is something which was mass transmitted by all the Sahaba according to the meaning of the hadith. Okay? If you group up all the meaning, then all of them are talking about the same Dajjal. You understand? All of them are talking about the same Dajjal. And here the example that we gave was of Mahdi, the coming of Mahdi. If you put all the ahadiths together, then the indication that Imam Mahdi is coming is 100%. Okay? Because there's more than 84 narrations. I said this last week. Likewise, the coming of Isa alayhi salam at the end of time, coming down, the descent of Isa alayhi salam. Him being taken to the heavens, that's established in Quran. But him coming down, if you put all the ahadiths together of all the companions that narrated it and the tabi'in, and it's mass transmitted. It's transmitted in such a way that there's no shadow of a doubt. Okay? That Imam Mahdi is definitely coming, Isa alayhi salam is definitely coming, Dajjal is definitely coming. And all of these are established through Mutawatir ma'nawi. Mutawatir according to the meaning of the subject matter, as we spoke last week. Then we go into another category, which was, for example, mashhur. Mashhur. This is slightly lower than mutawatir. So mutawatir is the highest ever form that a hadith can be transmitted, like Quran. It's basically like Quran. Just like Quran, you had hundreds and hundreds of Sahaba narrating the Quran according to every single word of the Quran, and then they narrated it to Sahaba and then Tabi'een in hundreds and thousands and millions afterwards. Okay? Likewise. So this was Mutawatir. So Quran is Mutawatir Lafzi. Mutawatir Lafzi. Mass transmitted even according to the every single letter. This is what is Mutawatir Lafzi. Now we go on to Mashhoor. Mashhoor is a hadith where initially it wasn't as reported. So from the Sahaba, it was one or two Sahabas that narrated it. Okay? But later on, from the Tabi'een and the Atba'ut Tabi'een's time, it became very famous and widespread, especially amongst the ulama. Especially amongst the ulama. This is a category called Mashhoor. Okay? So, this hadith, the example that they give is innamal a'malu bin niyat. The whole dunya knows innamal a'malu bin niyat. Even the person that didn't go to study one day in his life in Islamic school knows innamal a'malu bin niyat. All actions are judged by their intentions. Okay? Without intention, you can't get the jaza. The jaza is not going to be the same, isn't it? We can pray all day, but if our intention is not there, then the prayer won't be valid. If you're fasting all day and you're hungry all day, you're not drinking anything all day, would you be considered fasting without intention? No. There's no fasting without intention. You have to make the intention at suhoor time. So, intention is extremely important. Anyway, without going into the details of the hadith, the point is, this hadith was narrated only by Umar radiallahu anhu. And then from the Sahaba, from Rasulullah, from Sahaba, Umar radiallahu anhu, and then only narrated from Alqamah. After Alqamah, this hadith became wildfire. Everyone started narrating this hadith, innamal a'malu binniyat. Okay? It became like wildfire. This hadith of innamal a'malu binniyat. To the extent that even the four Imams, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Ahmad, Imam Malik, all of them, they narrated this hadith as well, innamal a'malu binniyat, in their compilations, in their books. Okay? So, this hadith became extremely famous. So, this is not just famous according to linguistic famous. Okay? Although we translate as mashhur as famous, but this fame is according to technical analysis. Okay? Technical analysis of every single chain of hadith. Because everything in hadith depends on the sanad. Sanad is the chain. Who did you get this hadith from? We can't just play hocus pocus and get hadith from anyone and everyone. No. We don't know who the people are on the chain. That's why our hadith is preserved. Khair. Ruling of mashhur. Mashhur gives us satisfactory knowledge. Itmi'nanul qalb. Okay? Gives us enough information that, alhamdulillah, our heart is sufficient to accept. Now, the Hanafi specifically, they say if the Quran has something general, if the Quran has a legal ruling that is very general, a very open general command, then with a mashhur hadith, you can make it specific. For example, the Hanafis give the example. Min ba'di wasiyatin yusa. That after, when a person is about to die, he makes wasiyah. He makes wasiyah, bequests. That this much should go to this person and that much should go to that person. Of course, he doesn't have a choice when it comes to his family members because that's already established. But something else, for example, he wants to give a £1 million to charity. Now, is he allowed to give 1 million to charity or not? The hadith comes, the hadith which is mashhur hadith, according to the Hanafis, hadith which is mashhur hadith, well-known hadith, established hadith, a hadith which is one of the highest category of hadith, comes and it says the person making wasiyah can only make up to 1/3. You can't make wasiyah more than 1/3. So if he's got 3 million, he can give 1 million. That's fine. But if he doesn't have 1 million, he only has 1 million and he wants to give everything to charity before he dies, this is going to be dhulm. This is going to be oppression to his family, to his wife, to his children and everyone. This will become inheritance would be taken away, isn't it? This will become great dhulm. So Hadith Mashoor came to specify. And Hanafi say this is allowed. Okay, if a hadith Mashoor is there, you can specify something which is general in Quran. So Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it general. Bequest as much as you like, basically, more or less. But in the hadith, it is restricted. It says you can't go more than 1/3 of your wealth, of your total amount of wealth. Then, for example, another example that is given of a general verse of the Quran, yusikumullahu fi awladikum, that you can make wasiyah for your children, isn't it? But inheritance is general. Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yusikumullahu fi awladikum, here is referring to inheritance in general. Now, in inheritance, is the person who killed his father, is he allowed to inherit from his father? This is where you need hadith. Hadith, not just any hadith. You can't, just because you got one sahih hadith doesn't mean anything. Yeah, it's a big problem. This is where usul comes in. This is why we're studying usul. Okay? Someone who he's already stipulated. Now, in the hadith, which is Mashoor, again, famous hadith, established hadith, one of the highest categories of hadith, comes and specifies this verse and says, the killer of the father does not receive any inheritance at all. Killer of the father, the son, if he killed the father, he cannot get inheritance. This happens, unfortunately, this happens. Even amongst Muslims, it happens. No one's angels. Okay? So, this hadith, Mashoor, specifies. So, according to the Hanafis, it is allowed to specify a verse of the Quran that is general. You can make it khas. Then we go into Khabarul Wahid. Khabarul Wahid is all the other ahadiths, general ahadiths that we find in Bukhari, Muslim, Tirmidhi, Abu Dawud, Nasai, Ibn Majah, Musnad Imam Ahmad, Musnad Sunan al-Darimi, all the other books. Okay, all the other books that we find in hadith, the general mass ahadith are of this category of Khabarul Wahid. Khabarul Wahid is basically it's not to such a degree, the reports of every single category from Rasulullah, from Sahaba, from Tabi'in, from Atba'ut Tabi'in, from the Sahaba, the companions, the scholars that compiled the hadiths, it's not of that category where it's not impossible to become a lie. Okay? It's not impossible for it to become a lie. With the other two categories, it's impossible for it to be a lie because it cannot be this famous, narrated from so many companions of the Prophet, so many Tabi'in, so many Atba'ut Tabi'in. It's impossible for it to be a lie. Okay, here Khabarul Wahid, it can be a lie. Okay, it can be a lie, it may not be a lie, it depends. That's why you have the scholars differing. Is this hadith sahih? Is this hadith not sahih? Is this hadith acceptable? Is this hadith mardud? This is where all the discussions of the muhaddithin come in. Okay, this is extremely important. This is extremely important. So, for example, the ruling would be, if something is showing, is in general hadith, if something is showing you, for example, awful luha, grow your beards. Grow your beards is a general command to everyone, to all the male folk. All the males have to keep beards. Now, is that taken to be, is that command of Rasulullah taken to mean that it is wajib? Majority of the ulama did say it's wajib. They understood that command to be wajib, that grow your beards long, meaning up to one fist at least minimum. Whereas other ulama, they came and said otherwise. Okay? Other ulama, they came and said otherwise. Like some of the Shafi'i ulama. Okay? So here it's extremely important for us to understand whatever the sunnah indicates for it to be wajib, it will be wajib according to the ulama that we follow. If the sunnah indicates it to be mandub and highly recommended, then that's what we're going to accept. For example, miswak. Miswak is something which is highly recommended. Okay? And likewise, mandub, sunnah, makruh, whatever it is, will have the hukum. Khabarul Wahid can also be used in, so the general hadith, we're talking about the general ahadiths, it doesn't need to be mutawatir, it doesn't need to be of the category of Mashoor. The general ahadith can be used in sahih hadiths. This is referring to sahih hadiths that are from the Khabar ahad category. They can be used in aqidah as well. Okay, can be used in aqidah. Aqidah is your beliefs. You can't just have any beliefs you want. Okay, beliefs have to be of the highest category. Okay, if you can't just make up beliefs. Beliefs doesn't come from beliefs has to come from revelation. Only from Quran, only from Hadith. That's what belief is. Okay, you can't establish it from any other source. Only from Quran or only from Hadith or only from Ijma. Only from Ijma. Khair, inshallah. We'll stop here and we'll carry on, inshallah, next week on Ijma. جزاكم الله خير. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت